The Pittsburgh Steelers wrapped their minicamp and are off for summer vacation. But I want to talk about how the young emerging defensive nucleus could be a huge impact on this team in the 2024 season. I'm Chris Carter of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Today, we're joined by Jenna Harner talking about that with clips from minicamp. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show in your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And as I said before, we're joined by Jenna Harner from Channel 11 WPXI. Jenna, it's always great to have you on the show. How you been?
It is always great to be here, joining you on a Friday. This feels like summer vibes here. It's like the last day of school.
Yes.
Everybody's excited. You get to go home for summer break. So I'm filling right into that mode right now.
Absolutely. And the Steelers did have some last day of school vibes with how they handled the end of minicamp. And it's been interesting to see. But something I wanted to focus on for this show is some of the talk we've heard surrounding some of the younger defensive players that are starting to emerge on the roster a little bit. And you guys all don't know the names. Joey Porter Jr. after last year, Keeanu Benton after last year. But even guys like DeMarvin Leal are getting a name. And also even a guy like Patrick Queen, who, yes, he's a veteran that they traded or that they signed in free agency. But Patrick Queen doesn't turn 25 until August, excuse me. So he still is 24 years old. There are some rookies that are 24 years old. You also throw in a Payton Wilson and other guys like that, and even guys like Trice. There's a lot of, I think, reasonable hype around the development of some of these guys and how they've looked in the early part of this year compared to how they looked throughout last year.
Yeah, and it was really funny because I go back to last week. It was the last week of OTAs, and I was talking with Deshaun Elliott, and he was saying, he's been in the league for, a handful of years, but it feels like it's his 13th year, and especially coming here with the Steelers, he's like, yeah, it's me and Minka kind of leading this offense or this defense right now. And I'm sitting there thinking about it. I'm like, no, that's actually a really, really interesting point, is that there are so many of these young players defensively. You obviously have those vets in key roles, guys like Micah Fitzpatrick, guys like TJ Watt, but this whole young nucleus of some of those guys that you just mentioned really is starting to come together. And it's been interesting to kind of see just the dynamics in the rooms and the defense as a whole in terms of, the relationships that guys have, but also who is emerging into those leadership roles. And these are also guys, again, you mentioned Joey Porter Jr. It's his second year, but he's expected to not only make a major leap this season, but he's expected to take on a big leadership role just based on what we saw from him last year and based on the type of guy he is out on the field. We know he's going to be a little bit more of that vocal type of leader while also leading with his play.
Absolutely. And I wanted to get into some of that. We talked to defensive coordinator Teryl Austin for a pretty long length on Wednesday, but we're not going to. Yeah, it was a very long time, 16 minutes. We're not going to play the full 16-minute clip, but this is about 5 minutes of just when we were asking him about some of the younger players. And specifically, we lead off with Patrick Queen. He'll touch on Joey Porter Jr., but also he'll touch on Keeanu Benton and DeMarvin Leal and even Nick Herbig and what they've done. Here's Teryl Austin from Steelers minicamp earlier this week.
How unique are the skill sets that Queen brings, and what will he allow you guys to do?
Well, the thing I think with PQ is, obviously we signed him because he had a great year, but it wasn't just a one-off. He's played well ever since he was at Baltimore, and we think he's a three-down linebacker for us. So he'll go in with the green dot. Before you ask Mike, he'll go in with the green dot, and he'll be the guy that's going to be out there on every snap. But I think he does a unique thing because he can cover, he can blitz, he can do a lot of things, and he's a really sharp football player. So I'm really happy we have him with us, and it gives us an opportunity, to build around him in that room.
How does that make the rest of your defense better?
Pardon me?
Having him there, how does that make the rest of your defense better?
Well, I think when you have a guy in there who's basically quarterbacking up front. I think that helps everybody. It brings a calmness to everybody. When that guy's the green dot and he's making all the calls and he's there every time, I think that settles things down. Sometimes it can get a little erratic. Hey, who's calling it? Who's got it? There's been times we've had to send it in from the sideline. There's been times we had different guys doing it. So I think you have that one steady person. I think that's really calming for the defense.
One of the critiques of Queen's game is that the best was brought out of him when he was playing alongside Roquan Smith. What has he kind of shown you early? Obviously, still football in shorts, that shows you that he can do that as an individual or work with the guys here to kind of play to the same level that he was achieving in Baltimore alongside Roquan?
Well, I think, I'm not going to, obviously it's always great to play next to a great player, but I think he was trending into that on his own. I mean, you're talking about a guy that was going into his third, fourth year, and each year he got better. So I think that's more to his own growth and development than to anybody else's, and then we still expect that to continue to go.
Terell, you got a lot of good contributions last year from the rookie class. I was curious with Keeanu Benton, what did you especially like about what he did, and where would he need to continue to evolve and grow?
Well, Keeanu is big and athletic and strong, and he's, the sky's the limit for that guy. I think the world of him right now, and I think he's got a lot of room for growth. The good thing is he's in a really good room. He's going to get a lot of pointers from a guy who's really good, in Cam and those guys that are in that room. And so I just really expect him to really take a jump this year and really be a dominant player inside.
Is Payton Wilson a natural dime, and if so, what kind of shot does he have of taking that position?
Well, I think he does. Dime linebacker, yeah, absolutely, because he can really run. I mean, I know if you guys watch practice, that guy can move. I think he's really sharp. He's into football. He asks great football questions. So I think that he's going to have a legitimate shot to be a dime linebacker right off the bat, because that is one area that he can do. He can cover. He can run. He's smart. The biggest thing is, like I said, once we get the pads on, and I don't anticipate it changing, but once we get the pads on, then we can really make a final determination of where we go with him.
Joey Porter Jr. talked about wanting to follow number one receiver, though he expressed that a little bit last year, but is that something that you guys are planning to do more this year because of his experience?
No, I think we always play it by ear, and what's the good matchup for us, what's the best matchup, what helps us put the best product out there on the field to give us an opportunity to win. That's what we look at. I mean, we don't look at personal grudges. Well, I want to guard him. Well, if that's not best for us, then that's not what we're going to do. And so we're going to do what's best for the Steelers and what gives us the best opportunity to win.
Third, fourth year.
Yeah, they're going to be really big. I mean, you can't understate it. I think Milk made a nice jump last year in terms of being really steady. We really could count on him. Where Marv was a little bit more up and down, but Marv's looked outstanding. They both look really good in this offseason stuff. Marv looks like he's in great shape, really runs to the ball, really doing some things. And so, again, it'll be a big year for him, and I'm expecting them to come through. They're both good guys, so I want the best for them, because if they're good, then that's really helping us.
Last one. That it's only shorts and helmets, but can you see the signs of Nick Herbig taking that year two jump?
Yes. And it's not so much in the rush and how he's rushing, but I think it's his approach to the game and what he knows. It's always a little different. You get used to NFL football the first year. The second year, you get a jump because now you kind of understand the game. And that's what I see with him. He understands what's going on around him. It's not just, hey, what's my position? He can understand, and he has a good feel for the game. And so I'm excited about Nick. And I think, when you look at what he did last year and the limited amount of reps he played, his impact was pretty good. And so if he's playing more this year, it wouldn't surprise me, and I wouldn't be like, oh, we got to get the other guys back in. I would be trustful of what he's going to do when he's in the game.
Terell Austin, the Steelers defensive coordinator, covered a lot of ground there with a lot of different young players on this team. But again, a lot of positives there, Jenna. I want to talk about that right after this first break here on the Locked On Steelers podcast and go over especially two of the guys at the top that I think are very important to this emerging, like they're going to have to lead this new young nucleus. We'll talk about that in a second here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Jenna Harner, stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, that's what brings home the winning trophy, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks to exhaust kits to LED headlights and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for, and with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices that you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. That's eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay's Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Jenna Harner of Channel 11 WPXI. Jenna, let's dive into some of the things about Joey Porter Jr. and Patrick Queen. One, there was a lot put on Patrick Queen by Teryl Austin there, and I think that's what's going to happen this season. He exclusively said Patrick Queen is the green dot, and they want to keep it with Patrick Queen to remove any confusion or question about who is the green dot, play in and play out. And I think that can be a lot that helps this Steelers defense if he can stay healthy. I mean, health is the precursor with everything. Everybody needs to stay healthy. It's in this conversation for the Steelers defense to be what it's being advertised to be. But Patrick Queen, the Steelers have not had that commanding linebacker presence in the middle of its defense. It's also a playmaker since Ryan Shazier. They were hoping to get it with Devin Bush. Didn't work. They were hoping Miles Jack could rekindle some of that. That didn't work. And so they've been trying to get this, and now they've got a guy who has been really talented and really good for the Ravens. And I thought it was interesting how he acknowledged, like, yeah, you know what, everyone's better next to a Roquan Smith, but we still really like what Patrick Queen does on his own.
And they still think that he has more growing to do, which is insane when you look at the level of the game this guy is already playing with. And it was really interesting because on Wednesday this week, I was talking with Queen in the locker room, and I asked him something to the semblance of, hey, look, you're kind of in that weird spot where you're still a young guy, but also you're in a role in this room where you're going to be looked at as a commanding voice, as a veteran. And he said, he welcomes that, but he also likes what they already have in place on the defense to be able to step into that role. I thought that was a really interesting point. I also was talking with him about Payton Wilson, and Payton Wilson vice versa about Patrick Queen. The two have so much praise for each other, which was something that was awesome to see. And Payton Wilson said, you look at a guy like Patrick Queen, what a gift that is to have a guy like that in a locker room, in your position group, the model of the player you want to be, learning from him every day, picking his brain. He said the same thing about Landon Roberts too, which I loved. But, Patrick Queen is in that role. And it was funny because, again, I'm, asking him too, hey, you're new to this team. Does that make it more complicated as well? And you can just tell he is so excited to be in this role. He's embracing it. He loves it here already, but he is going to be such a core of this young nucleus for a very long time here in Pittsburgh. And I think that this is something fans are going to absolutely love, but you can see already too in the locker room how much command he already has defensively and how much respect he's already earned. And I think he earned a lot of it, honestly, with what he did in Baltimore. And again, let his play speak, but also just the type of guy that he is.
Absolutely. I think that's when he walked in the door, they knew what it was. I mean, let's also be clear, like Mike Tomlin, has iterated several times over that, like, he really appreciated, he was very into Patrick Queen in the draft process. And even though Patrick Queen, kind of made a snide comment about Tomlin and being overlooked and how he took it as disrespect, I think we all kind of acknowledged there was a bit of tongue in cheek there, that he was kind of doing that as a joke. And even those that didn't think it was tongue in cheek, well, now he's playing for Mike Tomlin and he seems to absolutely love it. And he's talking bad about Baltimore. So maybe that was a little premature in saying that. But between him and Joey Porter Jr., who Teryl Austin wouldn't commit to saying he's going to follow the number one receivers around, I think he kind of acknowledged, like, hey, we're going to kind of go over matchups. But the clear thing is that, if that is something they can do, they're going to ask him to do it. But I think that there is a clear emphasis that, like, look, they know Joey Porter Jr. is the guy they want to be their number one. And just as much as Patrick Queen is huge for the middle part of the defense and keeping everything together and communicating and talking, Joey Porter Jr. if he can be that eraser cornerback, if he can be that guy that limits the number one guy on the outside, playing and play out, that could be that's another huge factor that adds to the big pieces of the puzzle that they're putting together. And again, both of these guys are young. Joey Porter Jr. is about to enter his second year. Patrick Queen's just about to turn 25 years old. These are guys who can be with the Steelers for the next 6, 7, 8 and plus years. And, whenever TJ Watt, Minkah Fitzpatrick, Cam Hayward, and those guys all age out of the defense and lead a new nucleus on the defense. And this is part of what we've been talking about, that the defense has successfully for the last 2 decades been able to say, hey, you'll pass down leadership from one star and superstar to another. And these two guys look like they could be the top candidates to fill those roles.
Yeah. And it's so interesting too, because you look at like both of their styles of leadership, at least what we see up to this point so far. And I was kind of talking to Joey Porter Jr. about that. I'd probably say the last week of OTA. So not this past week, the week before, but I was kind of talking to him. I said, yeah, you're going into that sophomore year that we always talk about, but do you find yourself being looked at as, hey, you were such a key playmaker last year for this defense. You're a guy that some of these guys are going to look to be that type of leader. And you see a little bit, I love the trash talk we've started to see a little bit between Joey and I'm not even say started to see, that we see, but you see the level of comfort with that. I love the balance of that, where he's going to go out there, he's going to talk his talk, but he's going to back it up with his play. And I think a lot of the guys really respond to that. And even some of those older guys in the room too, guys like Deshaun Elliott. Even we see a little bit with Minkah and just in those older voices in the room. But these young guys are kind of finding their niche and finding their way of saying, hey, this is the type of leader I'm going to be. This is what I'm going to do. You hear from guys all the time, some are way more vocal. Some are way more, just let my play do the talking. And I think you see more of like the loud outspokenness and the brashness from Joey Porter Jr. And then when you go to a guy like Patrick Queen, you see more of the, I don't want to say thoughtfulness, but just more of like the, come into my office and have a conversation with me type of leadership style. And I think that both of those styles not only complement the type of player that both Joey Porter and Patrick Queen are, but I think it really benefits the room where you're having all those different types of leadership styles. And I think a lot of the guys in those rooms are really responding to that. Again, guys like Payton Wilson, who are looking up to Patrick Queen and picking his brain on anything. We heard Teryl Austin mention Nick Herbig too. And I loved what he said, because you felt like last year, every single time Nick Herbig was on the field, some impact play happened. He got a sack, he forced a fumble. There was always like, oh, Nick Herbig's in for a couple snaps in a game, and he's going to go make this massive play here. So he's another second-year guy that they're really expecting to take a massive jump. And I think based on what we've already seen, that's going to be a reality.
Yeah, Herbig's another piece of this puzzle. They need, and like you said, they need depth on this team. They need guys to be able to respond, and that's where I think that these younger guys doing this now could be so huge for this team. Because what often happens for the best teams in the NFL, the teams that go the farthest, they have their stars, but they have younger guys step up and join them in being maybe not superstars, but at least star players or key contributors, on the team. I mean, you go and you look at the Chiefs, and yes, they have Patrick Mahomes, they have Travis Kelce, but then they had guys like Trent McDuffie step up on defense and become a serious corner for them. Nick Bolton played a big role in their linebacker. Creed Humphrey is a huge center for them. And so, Isaiah Pacheco isn't a superstar player, but he's a good running back. And so it's having those guys at different points are very important. And if the Steelers do get, superstar, if TJ Watt and Minkah Fitzpatrick and Cam Hayward, if those three guys are back to being, healthy and elite and big playmakers, and then they're buttressed by guys like Patrick Queen and Joey Porter Jr. and even some of these other guys like Payton Wilson. If Payton Wilson is just a really athletic dime linebacker that can help them when they're messed up, or when they get in mismatch problems, but he can help with that because of his athleticism and his size, that can be huge for how this defense complements itself with its talent, and that can be what allows it to be an elite defense again.
And that was a pretty big thing for Teryl Austin to come out and say this early too, is that they anticipate him being a dime linebacker, and they feel like, obviously putting the pads on and seeing what's going to happen there, but they feel like what they've seen from him already, he's ready to get to that point, or at least he's going to be ready to get there. And it was just, when we talked with him, Chris, were you in that scrum the other day with Payton Wilson?
Not that other day. I had talked with him on my own space, but what did he say then?
Yeah. So you've talked with him. You probably picked up on this too, but talking with him, he seems so wise beyond his years.
Oh, absolutely.
Compared, like, not that, I mean, media training at different schools, in different colleges is very different. And some players come in and there's so many factors that go into, what a player is like to have a discussion with in the locker room. But he, to me, I was very impressed with the conversations we had with him earlier this week. Just the demeanor and the way he paused and reflected on things. Like, if you didn't know who he was, or you didn't know that he was a rookie, you would be like, wait, this is a guy that's been in the league for a little bit, just by the way he carries himself and by the way he answers questions and by the way we were talking to him. And I was very impressed with the interaction that we had, where it was just like, no, he's very thoughtful. You can tell he's kind of like picking up on things in different ways. I loved one of the moments where I asked him just, how have the rookies been coming together? How do you guys feel like you're gelling? And he's like, the 12 of us, we're kind of all together more than we see we see each other more than we see our own families. And we've been together. But he's like, it's being a freshman all over again, except for the fact that you have a whole lot more on your plate. I'm like, okay, but you can see he's so excited about that too. And I think that is just such a beneficial part to who he is, not only as a player, but as a person as well.
Absolutely. I want to get to the defensive line aspect of this. We talked a lot about these off-ball players, but the defensive line is a huge part of the Steelers' defensive future as well. Keeanu Benton, he addressed him a bit there. We're going to go to Karl Dunbar in this next segment, the Steelers' defensive line coach, what he said about Keeanu Benton and what specifically he thinks that Keeanu Benton still has left out on the table there, as well as DeMarvin Leal, who you heard Teryl Austin say he's in great shape. When he said Marv, that's who he was talking about, was DeMarvin Leal. We'll get to Karl Dunbar and our thoughts on the Steelers' young defensive lineman here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Jenna Harner. Stick with us. We'll be right back. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Jenna Harner of Channel 11 WPXI. Jenna, going back on and talking about talking with Terell Austin, and he talked about Benton and he talked about DeMarvin Leal. These are two guys that they've drafted in back-to-back drafts. Benton last year in the second round and DeMarvin Leal in the third round the year before that. They're in their second and third years now, and if the Steelers' defensive line is going to take a step forward, it needs a young emerging player or two to join Cam Hayward. Larry Ogunjobi has, he's been solid, but not, a star player for this defensive line. But they need one, if not both of these guys to join in so that the Steelers know, hey, there's help coming for Cam Hayward. He's 35 years old, and there's a lot of confidence for Cam Hayward to return to being a prime playmaker in the middle of the defense. But getting those two guys could be a huge addition as well.
Absolutely. And I think there's been so much praise for Benton across the board, especially what we heard from what he did last year as a rookie was something that was very noticeable. It was, we always hear Mike Tomlin kind of talk about, okay, if somebody's not there, there's, one man's misfortune is someone's opportunity. And he usually means that in terms of injuries, but what better way for Keeanu Benton to just dive right into things in his second year than with Cam Hayward's situation right now? Obviously, Cam Hayward missing the majority of OTAs, so Keeanu Benton is getting those reps. And I think that's something, again, Mike Tomlin talked about. We heard a lot of people in the locker room talk about that, but that is something, again, that it sometimes is a little bit just underrated in the sense where you have these young guys getting these reps that they wouldn't normally get, and that's only going to bolster this defense. So I think that up to this point, what we've seen, and we don't entirely know what we're going to see from Cam Hayward in terms of his availability throughout training camp when training camp comes based on his contract situation. But for Keeanu Benton, this seems like a perfect situation here for him to continue to grow and to continue to do what these defensive coaches and this defense expects of him.
Absolutely. I want to cut to Karl Dunbar because we got a few minutes with him during minicamp as well, and I want to cut to the parts of the talk we had with him about Keeanu Benton, what Keeanu Benton could be on the precipice of doing, and what he said about DeMarvin Leal. Here, Steelers defensive line coach Karl Dunbar.
Karl said a lot of some good things about DeMarvin Leal. What's different about his approach this year, and just how he's started off?
I think he's understanding what we're doing, and he's maturing. He's a young man. We got him young out of Texas A&M, and he's starting to get his professional footing, and I think that's the most important thing for his maturation process.
How about when you look at Keeanu Benton? He definitely showed flashes for you, or maybe more than just flashes. What did you like about what he did, and what's it going to take for him to maybe take that next step forward?
I think we liked everything he did. I think the next step is just being consistent. You know, he didn't start to maybe game 6 or 7 when Montrevious got hurt, and he's shown steady progress the whole time. I think he's a big guy who's athletic, who's powerful, and he's smart. So that's the next progression for just being consistent.
Keeanu said that he wants to finish more often. He said that was his biggest problem as far as getting sacks last year. Did you see that as the biggest thing he had to work on?
Yes, when you watch the tape, he left 7 sacks on the field. And, I mean, he had help because TJ was getting there too. But when he has to finish, that's the thing. And I think you can see his body has changed, and he has a professional body because last year he did the combine, all the goddamn pro days, the banquet circuit. Now he had all off season to train his body, and you can tell just by watching him run around now.
So a lot of different things there. I find it really interesting. Let's start with Keeanu Benton. 7 sacks is a lot of sacks to leave on the table, but that reminds me a lot of how Stephon Tuitt used to talk about himself when he would say, like, I left so many sacks on the table this season. And Keeanu Benton, a lot of praise has been had for his run stuffing and what he did there. But this is why I think there's a really interesting upside and adding to this defensive nucleus. We're talking about the young emerging players in the Steelers defense. If Benton can be a guy, let's say he gets 6-7 sacks this year, along with Cam Hayward maybe getting 5 or 6, and then Ogunjobi adding 2 or 3, then DeMarvin Leal, like that gets the Steelers so much more pass rushing production. And again, now, if these guys are dangerous and respected in their ways, it forces offense to pick their poison. Who are we going to double team? We're going to double team the guy on the inside, or we're going to let TJ Watt get a one-on-one, or Alex Highsmith get a one-on-one. And I think a lot of this is a really good sign for what could develop. It doesn't mean it's going to happen, but it's all good signs that the Steelers defense could be getting some of these young guys to actually emerge in the defensive line.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, if you have Keeanu Benton, if he adds 4 or 5 of those 7 sacks that he left on the table, all of a sudden, again, things do change a little bit because opposing offenses have to say, okay, well, if we're going to be dealing with this guy, along with TJ Watt, along with Alex Highsmith, along with, Patrick Queen's coming in your face, like it's going to be one of the, or coming at you in your face, like that's going to be one of those. There's so many parts to how do you stop this Steelers defense in the ways that they want to get after you in the waves of which they do so. So I think it does really feel like Keeanu Benton can take that next step this season. And I really think we're going to see a lot of that just based on the production we saw from him last year. Now, granted, there's also times too where guys their rookie years have a lot of production and then take a step back. I don't entirely see that being the case with Benton, but I will be very intrigued to see kind of how we see him and continue to see him progress as training camp. We dive into training camp in a month and a half here.
I agree. Benton has a high ceiling, and Leal is a guy who I loved DeMarvin Leal's first year as far as the flashes that we saw. He dealt with injuries, but there were flashes that was like, man, if this guy puts it together, he could be a real problem, both as a defensive lineman and as like a flexible edge guy who can be moved around because of his size, his speed, his length. But last year he was getting healthy scratch, and he was a healthy scratch for several games at the end of the season, and that was not a good sign for the course of his career and where it was going for the Steelers. But we had him on the show here after talking to him at the start of OTAs, and he said he worked on a lot of things. He worked to become quicker, faster, and better over the offseason, and he feels he's ready to tackle this year. And to hear both Teryl Austin, the Steelers defensive coordinator, just sing his praises, and Karl Dunbar to also sing his praises, those are good things, because those are also guys that they don't blow smoke up nobody. If they're not doing well, they'll be like, he needs to be better. But the fact that they're saying that now, I think that's a much better sign, because I do think that it sounds like what they're getting at and what maybe DeMarvin Leal went through is maybe his head wasn't on the right direction going into last season, and now maybe it actually is.
Yeah, and that can happen again. Going in that second year, there's always those question marks of, okay, what is this player going to look like now that they've had a full year of NFL life under their belt? And I think the team has reiterated to Leal they need him to do what they expected him to do, and I think he expects that of himself too. I think it's kind of that twofold situation there. So you want to hope and you want to see him, get back to the production that we saw from him in the rookie year. But based on, again, what these coaches have already said about him, there's a lot of optimism surrounding there. And again, it's been football in shorts.
Exactly.
We will see things when the pads go on, and things might change here. But if you're a Steelers fan, there's a lot of optimism at least being carried over into training camp now of like, hey, there's a lot of potential for these guys. And this is always how it is at this point in the season anyway. But there is that potential here for players to take those next steps and this young defense to continue to grow in the way that they're growing. And I think that there is a lot to like.
There absolutely is, and that's why we've been covering these angles all throughout Steelers, OTAs, rookie camp, and mini camp. And now mini camp is closed, which means everyone's gone off. They're going off to their vacations or going to their private workout spaces, or maybe some are still working out at the facility. But there's still a lot to talk about with the Steelers, and there's still a lot of things that we got in mini camp and OTAs that I haven't had a chance to kind of delve out and cut up and talk about, including some of the conversations that we've had with players and coaches. We're going to be getting into all of that over the next month or so here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Jenna, thanks so much for joining us here. Let people can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Well, thank you for having me. As always, it's such a pleasure. You can find me on Twitter at Jenna Harner 11, Instagram, Jenna_Harner, and locally here in Pittsburgh on WPXI channel 11. If you are not in the Pittsburgh area, you can still stream us. Still check out all the stories that we're doing. We got some cool stuff coming up just throughout OTAs and stuff, conversations we had with guys. But check all those places.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Jenna, for joining us. And thank you all for joining us here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday, breaking down your Pittsburgh Steelers. See you here Monday on the Locked On Steelers podcast.